In this video, I'm going to create the data validation for the transaction total and tax on the bookkeeping interface. So let me just make it a little bit bigger. And this time it's easier because we can utilize the transaction date validation that we created before. Create two more, or just call it trans total validation, just valid. The next one is it tax total? Let me see, transaction tax, because I have to stick to the field name. Oh, it's called transaction tax. Okay, just move all the way, call it trans tax validation. Let me Control-1 to change the format, fill that with black. The font is going to be in yellow. Alright, I'll just copy this one to the transaction total. For the transaction total, we can make use of the transaction date validation that we made in the previous episode. This time, we just changed the transaction date to trans total. Let me just recap the two conditions. Inside and, because we want that we are valid to enter an invoice or bank transaction. So the trans num valid has to be equal to 1. Like this one, the trans num valid has to be equal to 1 so that we can enter an invoice. And then we have the condition that when the transaction total is blank, because it has to be blank so that we can enter some amount, right? And the second criterion inside the OR function is it has to be a number. What has to be a number? The transaction total has to be a number. Otherwise, if you enter a character, then it will return an error. So its number has to be wrapping around the transaction total. Alright, press enter. So this time we got 1 so that we still have all these, right? So let's move to the transaction total. And let me press Alt-DL to bring up the data validation. And then we allow custom. And then we left click the formula. Then we move to the trans total valid column, which is this one, right? So this one has to be equal to 1 so that we can enter a transaction total. Okay. Control C and then press Shift and down arrow and then right click on it. Then paste special and take the validation so that we can copy the validation. Okay, and then we press escape, Control S to save. Let me see, Alt-DL to see if this one, A13. Yeah, good, AK13. Go a little bit closer here. So let's say this one, if I enter a character instead of a number, then I should expect a warning, right? Let's say 14.1, then I should be able to go through. So let's say if this one, if I press 14.1 and I should expect not to be able to go through because I didn't enter a transaction reference. So when I press tab, I got an error message, which is good. So this one, let me just press 100.5. Good. Just press this one first. Okay, I will do the same for the transaction tax column. So it's rather easy. Let me go all the way to the transaction tax valid column. And this time I just copy the one from the transaction total. And then I simply change the transaction total to transaction tax. So this one is very easy, right? And the each number has to be tax because the tax has to be a number, right? Okay, so let me press enter. And then I got all these. Let me turn to the transaction tax. So when you are in the first row of the transaction tax column, simply click Alt-DL to bring up the data validation and then allow custom. Left click the formula and simply scroll all the way. Select the transaction tax valid. Okay, the first cell of the transaction tax valid column. Okay, this one has to be equal to 1 to enable you to enter a number. Control C, Shift and down arrow, and then right click, paste special, and just take validation. Let me press escape, Control S to save. Let me try typing some characters, see if I get the expected warning message. Okay, so good. So I got a warning message. If I enter a number 70, I should be able to go through. And this one, since I didn't enter any invoice number, I should expect a warning message, even if I type the correct format. Okay, so I got the warning message. Okay, let me just open that up. I want to create the same data formatting just like the transaction number so that it helps us enter correctly. Just press Alt-O-D to bring up the Conditional Formatting Manager. And since we created conditional formatting before, we can simply apply that to the columns that we did on the bookkeeping interface. Okay, so this time I just click this one, bring it up here. Instead of selecting only the transaction number, let me just select here, press N, down arrow, so that I can select all the columns on this side, all the way up to the transaction text. Okay, and then we apply. And we press OK, so we have the conditional formatting here, right? If I enter a revenue transaction, then I should be able to enter transaction here. Alright, so let's say if I get rid of this transaction, I should not be able to enter anything, okay? We are ready to move on to the settlement part in episode 20.